welcome to episode 321 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Now, we don't have our usual green screen backdrop this week because we are recording this in a Premier Inn in Wales. Yesterday we were at the final ODI of the series between England v New Zealand, and New Zealand won in the end reasonably comfortably, although comfortably probably isn't the word, so I'm not sure anyone was comfortable after playing for a squillion hours with the rain falling. There was actually a moment where Heather Knight was given out and then walked off, even though the decision was being reviewed by the third umpire. But she was just like, "No, I'm wet. I'm going in."
Going
At least
home.
that was my interpretation of events.
I'm taking my bat and my ball and I'm going home.
Now, because of New Zealand's win, added up to the washout on Wednesday at Northampton, what a great birthday for me that was, and England scraping home by 1 wicket in that match last weekend, Sid, that means that the series finishes 1-1. So the championship points, importantly, are split. They had to do one of those brilliant trophy presentations where both the captains hold one side of the trophy. Who, though, do you think
Surely
will be...
England should have won the trophy on the grounds that they beat New Zealand last time. That's the rules, isn't it?
Only for the Ashes. That's a different kettle of fish. Let's not get drawn into that debate. We can have that debate next year when it's the Ashes. I was going to say, Sid, who do you think this morning has woken up the happier of the two teams with that 1-1 result?
Well, I'm not sure who's woken up this morning happier, because if I was New Zealand, I'd have been kind of partying a bit harder last night, I think. But probably not too hard. Maybe they had a beer to celebrate, a Susie Bates' final ODI.
Yeah.
But overall, yeah, I think New Zealand will definitely be happy. I mean, the away wins in cricket are still harder to come by. Admittedly, this is like the least away win that New Zealand are going to get, because the conditions are obviously mostly similar to kind of New Zealand's conditions. But nonetheless, to come to England and to share the points, that's a fantastic result for them. And, that at the moment, I mean, there's the massive discrepancies in games played, but at the moment, New Zealand are top of the ICC Championship. In terms of qualifying for the next World Cup, they've beaten South Africa. They've now tied a series with England. They
obviously beat Zimbabwe
3-0, which is an important, to get that result. Those points in the bag.
Absolutely.
So I think that New Zealand will feel really happy, and they look like a decent team at the moment. They look like a proper team that are playing together and playing for each other. They've got 3 decent seam bowlers. They've got some good spin options. They've obviously got Amelia Kerr, who's kind of that trump card.
Yeah, for me, the really key thing yesterday was the fact that the middle order, as I wrote in The Guardian, the middle order actually showed a bit of backbone, and that was what they were so lacking when they toured here last in 2024 and they didn't win a game. It was a situation where, well, you've got Amelia Kerr out, you've got Susie Bates out, you've got Sophie Devine out. Let's all go home. And that could so easily have happened yesterday because they were 40 for 3. But actually it was Maddie Green, Brooke Halliday and Izzy Gaze who actually stood up and went, no, we're going to win this. And in the end, the fact that they, between them, hung around for the entire duration of play that was possible was absolutely critical to the DLS calculation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really high pressure situation. Obviously, Lauren Bell had come on and bowled really well up top, got those 3 LBWs. And we were looking at that going, I mean, the Win Her chart said that England were well in control at that point. Yeah. They were well behind, New Zealand well behind on DLS, but they kind of gradually clawed it back. It was there was some really good game management, I think, as well, really mature cricket, because they were aware, obviously, that they didn't need to go helter-skelter, because if the match didn't go to 20 overs, then there'd be no result anyway. So what they knew they needed to do was claw it back by 20 overs. So what they did was gradually built and built and built, and then at about 20 overs, that's when they just started to overtake England. And then after that, they kind of...
And we didn't get much beyond that, did we?
Yeah, I mean, they opened up a little bit, and they opened up that gap. But they really did it very sensibly, and it's like, that's like cool heads and all that. I mean, Maddie Green's not a youngster anymore. She's got a lot of years on her shoulder, and she's been around for a long time, and she showed all that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. But it does also feel that New Zealand are in a place now where they've got this next generation who are kind of coming through and who have actually played together for a little bit of time, and are getting used to the kind of situations that you that you face in international cricket, and are kind of, you know, able to handle that a bit more. And, you know, Brooke Halliday is only mid-20s. She's got years of her career left, although she's been around since 2021. People like Izzy Gaze are still very young. And I think that, yeah, we've reflected previously that we are worried about New Zealand's kind of big transition, and there's no doubt that, as Maddie Green says yesterday, the loss of somebody like a Susie Bates combined with Sophie Devine and Leah Tahuhu is going to leave a big hole. But I just felt quite heartened yesterday. I actually put it to Maddie Green in the press conference. I said, you guys look like a different team to 2 years ago. Do you feel that? And she said, yeah, actually I do. She said, you know, we've previously been guilty of relying on, you know, a couple of senior players, but we just feel like we're a different team now. So I thought that was quite striking.
Yeah, and that's kind of almost exactly what England aren't really doing.
Yeah.
You know, we're classically, with so many times at the moment, we're seeing England, you know, once they lose those early wickets, or particularly once they lose Nat Siver, which in this series obviously was before the game even started, you know, they just don't look to have the confidence to be able to, you know, really assert themselves. And it showed in this series, where the fact that they crawled over the line in the one match they won, and then were really not great in the match they didn't win.
Yeah, so currently, well, when we don't have Nat Stiver-Brunt, New Zealand have got a better middle order than England.
Yeah.
I obviously, thinking about kind of next generation, one of the frustrations of the last 10 days has been that England called up Kira Chatley to the squad, and, you know, big fanfare, big excitement. Is she the next wicketkeeper off the block? And then she didn't play a game, and they actually sent her home after the Northants game to go and play for Surrey, because they didn't have any intention of playing her at Cardiff. So she didn't get any game time at all for England, and that feels like a missed opportunity, another missed opportunity.
They also called up another middle order player, Jodie Grewcock, and batted her out of position. Now, I accept that there may be a long-term plan there for her to open the batting.
Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that last week
going
as well.
into 2029,
Yeah.
but at the moment, she looked very, very. She
looks a bit out of her depth.
Yeah, honestly, yes, she looks out of her depth.
But I think you've thrown her in, and we talked about this last weekend, but, you know, yesterday it was the perfect conditions for swing bowling combined with the best swing bowler in the world, Jess Kerr, and you're Jodie Grewcock, and you're having to face that. Now, you know, I think what we've got to be careful of doing is criticising England for not picking youngsters and being conservative, and then when they do pick youngsters, criticising them for picking youngsters.
But they're picking youngsters and batting them out of position. And ironically, this is what Lottie said about Davina Perrin.
That's what
it wouldn't be fair to.
That's what I said in the podcast last week, Sid. Anyway, so let's not rake over that ground again. I know we did also talk about Charlie Dean and the captaincy a little bit last week, but Charlie Dean came to give the press conference last night at Cardiff, and I thought she was absolutely excellent. And I know that you can talk if you want, Sid, about your slight criticisms of her in terms of like the kind of tactical awareness and moving around the bowlers, etc., while the game was actually going on. But one of the things now about being an England captain is it's not just a role on the pitch. There is a wider aspect to this, and I talked about this when Nat Stiver-Brunt became captain, that you cannot just say, well, I'm not going to do press, that's not the role that I choose for myself. This is the role that you are given when you are England captain. And what Charlie Dean showed me yesterday in that press conference was that she is really good at this now. And she has really matured in the last couple of years, and she is now able to do media, answer questions honestly, reflectively, thoughtfully. And doing those things all together is really hard, because you don't know what you're going to get asked. And to actually be able to bring a degree of authenticity to it, and to not just sound like a robot, is quite difficult. And she's doing that, but she's also genuinely, you feel like she is evaluating her own, you know, because I said to her, how do you feel you got on as captain? And she actually she gave me a real answer, which is not something that we necessarily see all the time.
She hasn't read the Heather Manual of Captaincy.
Exactly. So she said, you know, she actually said, she was talking about the match yesterday. Today was a balance. We needed to take wickets to win the game, but we didn't want to concede too many runs. Obviously, they were very deeply conscious of the DLS calculation as well. Talked about having to think about saving bowlers for at the death in case it went to 33 overs versus wanting to take wickets immediately because of the DLS calculation. And she kind of said maybe I didn't get the balance right, but I'm still learning, I'm improving my tactical knowledge, and I feel like this has been really valuable experience. And I think I've written that it's an audition for her as the potential future England captain. Well, for me, she's passed.
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of criticism of her yesterday because she kept Eccleston on 1 over too long. Eccleston bowled a couple of overs that were cheap, but she wasn't really. I mean, it was a very, very green pitch, and it wasn't clicking for Sophie Eccleston yesterday. So she bowled a couple of cheap overs, but that was mostly because Halliday and Green were like seeing her off. They were going, we need to be careful here. We know the one thing you don't do, again, sensible cricket, the one thing you don't do is like go after Sophie Eccleston immediately. But once she bowled a couple of overs, and then they were suddenly like, okay, she's not proving effective here. It's a very kind of one bounce pitch. So, we won't go after her. So she conceded 9 overs. At that point, Charlie should have taken her off because the next over then went for 13. That was a really important point in the game where New Zealand were really pushing to overtake England on the net run rate. But, at the end of the day, that's as, Charlie Dean almost answered that question, as you said, in the press conference, because she said, well, it was really difficult because I had to juggle those bowlers. She was also left with only Danny Gibson as her final option, which does make it a bit difficult because Danny Gibson, again, yesterday, I managed to get an important wicket. But,
well, one of the other things that happened was that Lauren Bell went off the field as well at one point, so that might have potentially interfered with some of the plans that Charlie Dean had up her sleeve. Just a quick update. I mean, people have probably seen this, but basically Lauren Bell, the previous day in the nets, had been hit on the wrist and actually had her wrist strapped up, which I hadn't clocked during the game because it's not her bowling hand. And when Maddie Green then drove the ball back at her and Lauren went to field it, that was why she was in so much pain, was because it was actually on an existing bruise essentially. But I was a bit nervous because she went down and then she did go off. Yeah, but we think
far and away England's best bowler.
Yeah, but we think things are looking okay as far as the World Cup goes. She did come back on and then come back to bowl what proved to be the final over that was cut short because of the rain. Anyway, so England v New Zealand switches.
The rain's the winner, Raf.
Well, it switches to the T20 format now. So hopefully the weather is just laughing at us now and going, well, I'll be nice and sunny for you in June.
Let me just check out the window, Raf. No, it's not.
Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the One Day Cup, Sid. Apologies, by the way, for not talking about that last week. We can't talk about everything every week. That's the thing. We've had a couple more rounds taking place this week. The table looks reasonably similar to how it did last week in terms of the top end. So Blazer on top, Hampshire just behind, well, actually a few points behind in second place.
Basically 2 games behind.
But Lancashire are languishing down at the bottom, which is interesting because they are the reigning champions and we did talk them up at the start of the season. What's going on, Sid?
I think the Lancashire thing is really simple. That we talked them up at the start of the season because we said that between Emma Lamb and Gabby Lewis and Eve Jones, they were going to score so many runs up top that they were going to win a load of games because they just piled on the runs in their first 3. And with those 3, you're going to expect an absolute shed load of runs. And of course, they haven't had none of those 3 played all the games. Gabby Lewis went home after the first couple of games injured. Emma Lamb has been called up for England. Eve Jones has been injured as well. She's played more games than the other 2, but hasn't played all the games. I suspect Eve Jones is also carrying a little bit of an injury around with her anyway, so she's bearing a huge weight now. So it's now all down to Eve Jones rather than what we thought would be 3 players scoring a hatful of runs. And without that, then it's slim for them. So they've just been unlucky with the England selections, unlucky with injuries. I don't think it fundamentally changes. I think I'd still make the prediction that I made, but obviously, without those 3, they have struggled because they're just not putting on enough runs.
Okay, what about the other end of the table then? The Blaze, who we thought would be maybe there or thereabouts, but we maybe didn't predict that they would be quite as strong as they have proved to be, Sid.
Well, where they've really been strong, so let's put some stats up, because where they've really been strong is in the bowling department. So, let's put the stats up for the batting first, because we see, if we put the stats up for the batting, we see Warwickshire on top. Why are Warwickshire on top? Well, it's got an awful lot to do with the hotel. hotel being built next to the Warwickshire ground, and they're carting the ball into it because they're playing off a very short boundary on one side, some huge scores. So that's massively inflating Warwickshire's batting numbers. The Blaze aren't really up there with the batting, but when we look at the bowling, we'll see really where Blaze are excelling, because their bowling, all of their numbers are just like so much better than everybody else's. So they're right up there. They've got the top economy rate, the best dot percentages, the best strike rates, the best lowest boundary percentages. So they're really containing teams, and it's really hard to score runs against them, and people are losing wickets to them. And let's look at the individual bowlers that Blaze have got and see what's going on there. So let's put out the individual bowling units that Blaze have got. The key one's been Charlie Phillips. So Charlie Phillips, the leading wicket taker in the County Cup, alongside Jess Jonathan. They've both got 18 wickets. I think Jess Jonathan's got a better economy rate, but she's right up there.
She's got a little bit more experience than Charlie Phillips.
Yeah, Charlie Phillips' first proper season. She played a few games last season, but this is her first season where she's been definitely in the Blaze first 11. But it's not just Charlie Phillips. You look at that top four there in the Blaze bowling. We've got 4 bowlers who've all bowled 55, 60 overs each in the competition so far, and they've all got an economy rate close to 4. You've got Kirstie Gordon 4.34. That's the highest economy rate of their top 4 bowlers. So they're taking wickets. They're bowling with a fantastic economy.
Who are the others? So Charlie Phillips.
So Charlie Phillips, Grace Ballinger, and Catherine Bryce. So cool. Yeah. Charlie Phillips is just has been a bit of a revelation this year. We do tend to get a breakthrough bowlers. Sophie Munro, looking back to previous seasons, for example, was another one that where one season doesn't necessarily define a bowler's career, but she's bowling in the power play. She took a 5 for Yorkshire where she got all the top 3 wickets: Talia Wilson, Emma Marlowe, Holly Armo. She also got Bess Heath. She's also getting 78% of her wickets are LBW all bowled. Wow. So they're all proper bowlers' wickets against the top bowlers that she's bowling. Sorry, the top batters that she's bowling to in the power play.
Yeah,
so really I think that's really positive. She's probably got some more time to grow as well. So I think that longer term, she keeps working. She could definitely be a handful going forward. Great.
Now let's think globally, Sid, because we've got more World Cup squads coming in. I think there's been 4 more come in this week, if I've been tracking correctly, and we're going to talk about 3 of them. First of all, Scotland announced their squad on Monday. The big news, although not in the least bit surprising,
someone that I've mentioned already on this podcast,
is that they have included Kirstie Gordon in their side. Blaze are going to be a bit depleted actually, because Kirstie Gordon's also in that squad to play those internationals up in Edinburgh at the Grange come the start of June, just before the World Cup.
First games for Scotland for 7 years.
Yeah, so that's all very exciting. Now, I interviewed Kirstie Gordon back in February for The Observer, and she talked about the reasons for her decision to choose to go back to Scotland, and she said that the Scotland coach Craig Wallace was absolutely instrumental in that decision. I was able to actually interview him on Monday and ask him about that and kind of get his side of the story, and it was interesting. I said, was there a moment, because obviously he's been in regular communication with her since he became the Scotland coach, because why wouldn't you be?
Please come back, Kirstie.
Yeah,
but
he did say, I've been trying really hard not to put pressure on her and just keep it really casual and just kind of, stay in contact. And the last but one time that he was in Nottingham, he went to see Catherine and Sarah to have a chat to them about Scotland stuff. And he said, I just messaged Kirstie and said, do you want to go for a drink? And she came, and I told her all about our plans for the next 18 months for Scotland. And he says, I could see in her eyes, she was like, wow, I want to do that. And he says, I left that meeting feeling quite happy. So he knew then, I think, that she was going to come back. And then it obviously took a while to kind of sort out all the logistics. And so I said, well, what's her reasoning? And he just said, well, it's very kind of her to say that it's, that I've been instrumental, but it's actually all about the team and how well we're playing, but also the kind of group that we've got. And how we're acting as human beings and as people, as he put it. And it was, it was an easy sell, because we're going to this World Cup. We're going to go to many more World Cups, hopefully. We're going to keep improving, and Kirstie just wants to be part of that. It was a lovely interview, and then I did kind of finally say, how's Kirstie feeling about that England v Scotland game at Headingley? And he was like, well, of course, you know, we at Scotland we take all of our games very seriously. We're excited about all of them, but then he did admit that I'm going to have to work hard to calm her down on the day. I was like, no, you don't. No, we want to see a fired up Kirstie Gordon. How great would that be if she took a pile of wickets in that game? Anyway, so all eyes on Headingley on 20th of June, and of course Scotland's overall World Cup campaign, which for them is as close as they're going to get to a home World Cup. So really exciting for them. The other squad that we were going to talk about was the South Africa squad, which was meant to be announced, then wasn't announced. Then there was some kind of delay that Cricket South Africa tried to say was just a technicality or something. But meanwhile, lots of speculation, rumour behind the scenes that Shabnam Ismail was going to reverse her international retirement. And lo and behold, Ismail has been named in the South Africa World Cup squad, as has Dane van Niekerk. So welcome back to 2010, everybody. It feels a bit odd. I feel slightly uncomfortable about it for a couple of reasons. One is, if you're an up-and-coming young South African player, let's say you're a quick bowler, or let's say you're a kind of batting all-rounder, then your spot's just been nabbed by somebody who, you know, really, maybe that ship has sailed, or you thought it had sailed. What message does it send if your coach is saying, I'm so desperate for players that I'm ringing people up who have already announced their retirement to get them out of retirement, and I think they're better than you? I think that must be really discouraging for South Africa. The other reason why I'm baffled by it is because South Africa have been in the last 3 World Cup finals, so they're not underperforming. They're doing the opposite of England. And yet it just feels a bit retrograde.
Yeah, it's like they're going back to, not going back to the future, they're going back to the past, as you said. And you know, one of the things about the South Africa team kind of pre this kind of the 3 World Cup finals in a row and things was that actually they did kind of struggle to be a team. You might remember, you know, there were a few fallings out and a few people storming out of camps, and it wasn't a happy environment. And you're bringing back some people that were part of that. You know, they weren't necessarily the instigators of it, but, you know, I'm not sure that's an atmosphere that you want to try and recreate. Now, you know,
it's not necessarily that though. It's if somebody retires and they're a big personality, they leave a hole, and then you fill that hole. This is exactly what Maddie Green said yesterday about Susie Bates, who played her last ODI yesterday. She's going to leave a hole, and you have, as a team, have then got to fill that hole somehow. South Africa, it feels like they've just filled the hole of Ismail, having already had to fill the hole of Dane, and then you're bringing them back, and there's no hole for them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I can understand why we've got to where we are, and Ismail remains, you know, she's clearly very fit, and, you know, she's put in some decent performances for someone that's no longer playing regular international cricket. She has put in some decent performances. The other thing with Ismail is that I think it was made reasonably clear. I don't think I'm putting words in her mouth here, and I'm sorry if I am, that the reason that she retired in the first place was because South Africa contracts don't pay any money, essentially, and she was like, well, I'm going to focus on the money.
They do pay some money,
sorry, yes,
but relatively speaking to what you can earn on the franchise circuit.
Exactly. Yeah. But sheer coincidence, this South Africa get to the World Cup final even. Not even if they win it, if they get to the final, they're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
If they win it, they'll make an astronomical amount of money. I suspect that was a factor.
Okay. As for the poor communication around the decision, that feels like we've moved backwards about 3 or 4 years, doesn't it?
Well, it was very odd to announce they were going to announce the squad, and then a load of rumours. I suspect what happened is that people have been briefed off the record, because that's what normally happens with England squads. When there's an England squad announced, we usually get told about an hour and a half beforehand, and then so that it means that you can write a piece and then have it ready to go at the moment. And I suspect that had happened with the South Africa thing. So a load of journalists knew. But they then decided to pull it, and everyone was like, what's going on here? Anyway.
Yeah, we don't know what happened, but it was a little bit of a shambolic way to announce your World Cup squad for a team that you're hoping can go on and do one better and actually win the thing. The final squad we wanted to talk about is the Australia squad, which is perhaps the one that we've been most hotly anticipating, aside from the England one, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Now, this is really odd, Sid, because for me, the Australia squad, despite the fact that they're allowed exactly the same number of players as everybody else, according to ICC World Cup regulations, the Australia squad is like a TARDIS. Feels like it's just stretched to involve everybody who we were wondering whether or not they were going to get picked. So you've got Annabelle Sutherland coming back, having not played in the Caribbean. Alana King is in the squad, despite clearly not being in the pecking order in their top 3 spinners.
Yeah, they've also felt they had to include King because she put so much pressure on the selectors. But then they've also stood there and gone, basically, well, we've included her, but we're not going to play her. Have they not?
Well, they have, they have. I'll come to that in a minute, okay. But I just wanted to finish saying about people who they've included, because they've also found room for Grace Harris, who did she go to West Indies? Anyway,
she did,
no. So they've managed to also keep Lucy Hamilton in. They have not selected Darcy Brown, so they've kind of gone with Lucy Hamilton over Darcy Brown because they want the left arm option.
Because what the Darcy Brown thing shows is that Sean Flegler and Shirley Nitschke are at odds with Charlotte Edwards, because Charlotte Edwards has picked Lauren Filer. So Charlotte Edwards thinks that Lauren Filer and Darcy Brown are basically the same player. You know, put the brain, you wouldn't be able to recognise them.
One's a bit taller and falls over. One's a bit taller and falls over a bit more. Yeah.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, whereas the Australians have gone, we don't actually think that the conditions and the pitches are gonna suit that kind of bowler. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is.
We'll see who's right. Let's see if Lauren Filer takes piles of wickets.
We will see who's right.
Darcy Brown will be sitting there going, well.
But yeah, anyway, you were saying about the statement so Sean Flegler, as the chief of selectors, was asked about the inclusion of Alana King when the squad was announced, and he actually said, "I think the pecking order is pretty clear. We've got Ash Gardner, Sophie Molyneux, and Georgia Wareham, and then if conditions allow, then Alana King comes into it as well." Really interesting that he's actually set out his stall quite so clearly. Now, often we have to read between the lines to understand what the pecking order is in teams, and you can do that, and you can look at various things they've said and 11s that they've selected. But he's actually completely set out his stall here. And said, before the World Cup even starts, before we play any warm-ups, before we even get to England, here is the order in which my spinners are going to be selected. And I think that's a big mistake to do that. I think you back yourself into a corner. Yes, we appreciate that Sophie Molyneux is top of the pecking order, because you have backed yourself into a corner with that as well by naming her as captain. But what happens if Alana King comes out and takes 25 wickets in one of those jumpers for goalposts warm-up matches where everyone decides that they're going to bat 3 times, and if the other 3 take 2 or 3 wickets between them? Are you really saying that Alana King has got no way, with anything that she does, of playing herself into the 11?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's basically to go, well, only if we're going to play 4 spinners, just seems like you're really kind of chucking her down. You're trampling all over her hopes, and it's a really bad way. It's a really, really poor player management. Because usually what coaches do to players, to some criticism from the players themselves, ultimately, is they go, "Oh, you've always got a chance. The door is never closed." Yeah, and then when they don't play her, the player goes, "Oh, she said I always had a chance, but I didn't." But in this case, they've just gone to Alana King. No, you're not going to play.
No, you're not going to play. No, unless we suddenly think that it's going to be a really, really spinning pitch, which I'm afraid you just don't really see that much in England. This isn't the subcontinent. Yeah. So to effectively say to somebody before the World Cup even gets underway, you're not going to play, I think that's pretty poor from Australia. They've found room for King in the squad. They found room for all kinds of people in the squad, and it's a very exciting squad. But we all know that the real problem is with the leadership issue, and we won't harp on about that again. I'm sure we'll find plenty of time to talk about it during the World Cup itself. Anyway, we'll wrap up there. Congratulations again to New Zealand. I should also say congratulations to England, I suppose, because the series was drawn, but it just feels to me like that was a win for
moral
New Zealand.
Victory to New Zealand, yeah.
Especially for surviving our terrible weather. Apologies for that. Anyway, we'll see you in a week's time. Bye for now.
Bye.